There is a story that almost nobody gets right, and it has been passed around for so long that most people think they already know it. They say she walked onto Johnny Carson's stage and made the whole room go quiet in a bad way. They say Carson had never seen anything like it. They say she crossed every line there was and then kept going. But here's the thing. The real story is not the one people keep sharing. It is messier than that. And it says just as much about Carson as it does about her. Let's go back to the beginning, because that is the only way any of this makes sense. By the early 1970s, Johnny Carson was not just a television host. He was the television host. Every night, tens of millions of Americans sat down with him like he was an old friend stopping by. He was smooth, he was quick, and he made everything look easy. When a guest did well, it was because Carson let them shine. When a guest fell flat, Carson made sure nobody noticed. He was that good at his job. But Carson had rules. He never talked about them out loud. He never handed anyone a list. He just had a way of knowing when someone had stepped over a line, and once that happened, the door closed. Not just for a little while. For good. More than 30 names ended up on that list over the years. Some of those people still have not figured out exactly what they did wrong. Now here is where the story gets interesting, because the guest most people point to when they say the word rude is not the one who actually caused Carson the most trouble. People love to repeat the tale of a glamorous woman sitting across from Carson with a cat in her lap, tossing out a line so shocking that the whole studio gasped. Depending on who is telling it, the woman changes. Sometimes it is one actress, sometimes another. The story travels fast because it sounds so perfectly outrageous. But it did not happen. Fact checkers looked into it. Carson himself denied it more than once. When the story came up during a live interview in 1989, Carson's face did a thing that only Carson's face could do, and he said very calmly that he was pretty sure he would have remembered something like that. And beyond that, the show was never broadcast live during his time running it. Every episode was taped ahead of time. A network as careful as NBC would have cut anything that wild long before a single viewer saw it. So that story, as fun as it is, belongs in the pile of things people made up and repeated until they believed it themselves. The real incidents, the ones that actually happened, are more complicated and honestly more interesting. Take the night Gabor came on and sat next to Marlon Brando. This was in May of 1963, when Carson took the whole show out to Hollywood for 2 weeks. The guest list that night looked incredible on paper. Brando alone could have carried an entire episode. But from the moment the cameras started rolling, something fell off. Brando had clearly been drinking. He settled into his chair and seemed willing enough to have a conversation. Gabor, on the other hand, had an agenda. She was there to talk about her new face cream, and she was not going to let anything get in the way of that. Every time Brando started a sentence, she found a way to steer it back around to her product. Every time Carson opened up a new topic, she looped it right back. It was the kind of thing that feels amusing for about 30 seconds and then starts to feel like someone slowly turning up the heat in a room you cannot leave. Brando told a joke. The audience laughed politely, the way audiences do when they like someone more than the material. And that is when Gabor said something sharp and pointed and aimed right at Brando's pride. She made it clear that the only reason anyone clapped was because of who he was, not what he had said. Brando did not let that pass. He snapped back at her in a way that was not polished or witty. It was just direct and a little harsh. The pleasant television conversation cracked down the middle. Carson sat between them like a man watching two fires burn toward each other and wondering which one to put out first. Gabor eventually stood up and left the set. Brando stayed put with a look on his face that said he had already decided he won. Carson held the whole thing together through sheer professionalism, but everyone in that room knew something had just gone sideways. What is strange is that Gabor kept coming back after that. Carson let her return again and again through the 1960s. That tells you something about how his mind worked. He could find someone genuinely irritating and still recognize that they made the room more alive just by being in it. Gabor was exhausting and entertaining at the same time, and Carson understood that combination better than almost anyone. But not every difficult guest got that kind of patience. Ellen DeGeneres made her first appearance on The Tonight Show in November of 1986, and she did something almost no female comedian had done before. She killed it so thoroughly that Carson invited her to come sit on the couch. That was a big deal. That spot on the couch was not handed out casually. It meant Carson thought you were worth a real conversation, not just a performance slot. For a while, things went well. DeGeneres was sharp and easy to watch. But then she came back for a third appearance, and she did a joke Carson had specifically told her not to do. He had been clear about it, and she did it anyway. After the show, Carson did not let it go. He stopped the conversation in front of his staff and pointed right at her and reminded her exactly what he had said and exactly what she had done. After that, she was no longer welcome on the episodes he hosted himself. She could still come on when someone else was filling in, and eventually she did. But from Carson personally, the message was simple. You were told. You chose not to listen. We are done. Carson's rules about the show itself were extremely specific. Guests could talk about their projects. They could mention their movies and their albums and their books. What they could not do was name a rival network on the air. NBC did not spend years building The Tonight Show into something enormous, just to let guests casually advertise for the competition during prime airtime. William Shatner found that out the hard way. He came on in 1983 and talked for 4 straight minutes without letting Carson say a word. Then he turned his body away from Carson to talk to another guest. And then, as if he had not already done enough, he mentioned that his show aired on ABC. He said the name of the competing network out loud, on camera, without blinking. Carson smiled. He was too professional to do anything else in that moment. But people close to the show said later that Shatner had managed to break several different rules in one appearance, which was something of an achievement in the wrong direction. The incident that probably best shows what Carson actually valued happened on a September night in 1975. British actor Oliver Reed came on the show and quickly made it clear that he had opinions about women and was going to share all of them, whether anyone wanted to hear them or not. He made dismissive comments about women's roles in society, and every time actress Shelley Winters tried to respond, he cut her off. He waved her away like she was interrupting something important. The tension in the studio climbed and kept climbing. Winters finally walked off the stage. For a second, it seemed like the moment might pass quietly. It did not. She came back. She walked right up to Reed and poured her glass of whiskey directly over his head on live television. The audience erupted. Carson, who had looked increasingly uncomfortable through Reed's behavior, did not step in to stop her. He let it happen. That probably tells you more about where Carson's sympathies were than anything he could have said out loud. Then there was Shelley Winters in a different category entirely. And Sarah Miles, a British actress whose appearance became one of the most uncomfortable moments in the show's history, not because she attacked Carson or embarrassed anyone else, but because she seemed completely lost. She was either overwhelmed or, as many people watching at home believed, she had taken something before she walked on set. She gave almost nothing. Carson kept trying to find a thread, keep the conversation moving, give her something to grab onto. He was working harder than he should have had to. At the end of it, he asked her a simple question that landed like a quiet surrender. He asked if she had enjoyed the evening at all. She was never asked back. The deepest and most lasting version of Carson's anger did not come from anything that happened on stage, though. It came from something that happened in a phone call, or, more precisely, from the timing of a phone call. Joan Rivers had spent over 20 years building her relationship with Carson. She had been rejected by the show's bookers 7 times before she finally got her shot in 1965. When she did get on, Carson told her on air that she was funny and that she was going to be a star. That line followed her for the rest of her life. She became his permanent guest host. She appeared on his show roughly 185 times. She turned down other offers because she felt loyal to him. On camera, they looked like 2 people who genuinely enjoyed each other. Off camera, the truth was different. Rivers wrote later that when the red light went off, they had almost nothing to say to each other. Small talk, polite questions, and then silence. They were close in one way and barely knew each other in another. And that kind of relationship, warm on the surface and thin underneath, can break harder than a real friendship when something goes wrong. In 1986, a television network offered Rivers her own late-night show. The money was transformative. The opportunity was real. She took it. Carson found out from someone else before she could tell him herself. When she did call, he put the phone down. She called again. He put it down again. He never spoke to her after that. Not once in the remaining 19 years of his life. He made the Tonight Show team quietly clear that anyone who appeared on Rivers' new show would not be welcome on his. Her show struggled to find its footing and was canceled after about 7 months. Rivers lost her husband to suicide during those months. Carson sent nothing. She remained banned from the Tonight Show for 28 years. When she finally came back in 2014, it was a brief cameo on the first episode of a new host's run, exactly 49 years after her debut. She died 6 months later. Rivers believed he had reacted so severely because he thought of her as someone who belonged to him. She pointed out that male comedians had left the show before to do their own things and had been welcomed back. The people around Carson pushed back on that and said those men had told him first and had left with his blessing. In Carson's world, the difference between those two things was not a small detail. It was everything. What all of these stories share is the same thing underneath. Carson had a code. He expected people to know it even though he never explained it. Respect the crew. Do not lie to him. Do not make him look foolish in front of an audience. Do not blindside him. These were the things that could not be taken back once they were done. Ed McMahon, who sat beside him every night for decades, said something about Carson that explains all of it. He said Carson could stand in front of 20 million people and feel completely at ease. But put him in a room with 20 people he did not know, and he would be uncomfortable. The stage was not just his job. It was the one place in the world where everything was in its right place, and he knew exactly where he stood. When someone disturbed that, even once, Carson did not forget it. And the thing that made him remarkable was not the grudge itself. Plenty of powerful people hold grudges. What made Carson different was how quietly he carried them. No outbursts, no public statements, no explanations. Just a door that was open one day and locked the next, and a man behind that desk who kept on smiling like nothing had changed at all.